Mosi Adebayo's champagne glass slipped from his hand the exact second the little girl broke through the line of security and threw her tiny arms around his leg. Grandpa. The word cracked across the glittering charity ballroom louder than the orchestra. Silence swallowed the room. Cameras turned. Executives froze. Mosi's breath stopped as he stared down at the child with wide, shaking eyes. She could not have been more than 6. Her dress was plain, her sandals dusty, her face lifted with innocent certainty. Then a young woman pushed through the crowd, pale with panic. "Please," she whispered, grabbing the girl's wrist. "We have to go." But the child looked up at Mosi again and said the one thing that turned shock into terror. "Daddy Cabello said you would know me. What would you do if a child appeared in front of the whole world and called you family with a name only the dead should know? Tell me your country and local time in the comments. And if you love emotional, powerful stories filled with secrets, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me for the rest of this journey." For 3 full seconds after the girl spoke, nobody in the ballroom moved. The silence did not feel empty. It felt alive, sharp, watching. Then the room exploded. Voices crashed over one another, glasses clinked against tables, chairs scraped polished marble. A journalist near the back lifted his phone higher, zooming in on Mosi's frozen face. Somewhere to the left, a woman gasped so loudly that several heads turned before snapping back toward the stage. "Who is that child? Did she say Cabello?" "No, that cannot be right." Mosi did not hear all the words clearly. He only heard fragments like broken pieces of metal striking each other inside his skull. "Grandpa. Daddy Cabello. Know me." At his leg, the little girl held on as if she belonged there. Her fingers were small, warm, real. His dead son's name was still ringing through the ballroom when the woman who had rushed forward, thin, breathless, terrified, reached the child and tried to pull her back. But the girl resisted just enough to look up at Mosi again. Not with greed, not with performance, with certainty. That certainty unsettled him more than any accusation could have. "Imani." The woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Come here. Now." The child turned reluctantly. "But Mama, he's my grandpa." A collective murmur spread through the guests like fire catching dry grass. The woman Amara, though Mosi did not know her name, yet closed her eyes for half a second, as if the truth had become a blade in the child's mouth. When she opened them again, shame and fear burned together there. "We are leaving," she said. She did not sound like a scammer. She sounded like someone who had spent years running from exactly this moment. Before Mosi could speak, Zuri stepped forward. She moved gracefully, elegantly, every inch the fiancé the newspapers adored. Her gold gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Her smile, however, was no smile at all. It was a weapon arranged into perfect shape. "This is beyond inappropriate," she said, projecting just enough for the nearest rows to hear. "Security." 2 men in black suits immediately approached. The little girl flinched. Mosi felt it at once, the way her body tightened against his leg. It was an instinctive fear, practiced and familiar. Not the fear of a spoiled child being corrected. The fear of a child who had learned that men in dark suits meant danger. The detail hit him hard enough to stir him out of his shock. "Wait," he said. His voice was not loud, but the room obeyed it on reflex. Even the orchestra's nervous rustling ceased. Zuri turned to him. "Mosi, this is a setup." Amara lowered her head. "We did not come to cause trouble." Her voice was soft, but it carried. Mosi looked at her fully for the first time. She could not have been older than 30. Her dress was clean but cheap, the fabric worn at the seams. There was a tired dignity about her, something fragile that had refused to die. Her face was beautiful, in a way that wealth could not manufacture. High cheekbones, deep brown skin, wide eyes darkened not by cosmetics, but by many sleepless nights. She kept one arm around the girl, as if the child were the only thing holding her upright. Mosi searched her face. Nothing. No memory came. No recognition. But there was something maddeningly familiar in the tension around her mouth, in the way she stood as though expecting humiliation before it arrived. Tendai, the company's chief legal officer, hurried up the steps from the side aisle, already sweating. "Sir," he said quietly. "Though not quietly enough, we need to remove them now, before this becomes a public disaster. It already is public." Zuri snapped. She was right. At least 30 phones were pointed toward them. Mosi could almost feel the story spreading in real time, leaping from message to message, screen to screen, hungry for blood. Billionaire CEO confronted by secret grandchild. Scandal at Adebayo Foundation gala. Dead son, hidden child, mystery woman. He should have ended it immediately. He knew that. The board would expect it. The investors would demand it. The old instincts of power told him to contain, distance erase. Yet he could not stop staring at the girl. Imani. She had lifted one hand to her throat, now clutching a tiny pendant that rested against her faded dress. Perhaps she did it from nerves, perhaps from habit. But the moment the pendant shifted into the light, Mosi's pulse slammed. A lion. Not just any lion. A small, carved gold lion with one paw raised. His breath caught. No, that was impossible. No, that was... His son had owned a pendant almost exactly like it. An old family heirloom passed from father to son, though Mosi's own father had given it to Cabello early, calling him the cub who would become a king. Mosi remembered fastening it around the boy's neck on his 18th birthday. He remembered Cabello laughing, saying it was too dramatic, too heavy, too old-fashioned. He also remembered the day it disappeared. After the accident, it had never been recovered. Mosi stepped down from the stage before anyone could stop him. The ballroom held its breath. "Let me see that," he said, his voice lower now. Imani looked at her mother first. Amara's face drained of color. "Please," she whispered almost to herself. Mosi did not know whether she was begging him or praying. Slowly, carefully, Imani lifted the pendant toward him. He did not touch her. He only bent close enough to see the back. There, scratched into the gold in crooked young handwriting, were 2 letters. K. Cabello Adebayo. The world tilted. A sudden roar filled Mosi's ears, though the room itself remained strangely distant. He saw not the ballroom, but a younger version of his son sitting at a desk with a pocket knife, grinning, while carving his initials into forbidden gold. Mosi had scolded him for ruining a family treasure. Cabello had shrugged and said, "Then now it is mine for real." Mosi straightened too quickly. For a second the chandeliers blurred. Zuri touched his arm. "Mosi." He pulled away without meaning to. That more than anything changed the air. Zuri's expression sharpened. Amara saw it too. Fear flashed through her face, but beneath it Mosi saw something else now. Exhaustion, not theatrical distress. The bone-deep weariness of a woman who had fought too long and expected to lose again. "She should not have spoken," Amara said. Her hand tightened around Imani's shoulder. "I told her we should never come. I told her nobody here would want us." "Then why did you Tendai demanded? Why bring a child into a private event and make such a claim in public?" Amara's gaze flicked toward the rows of wealthy guests, the glittering centerpieces, the polished arrogance of the room. For a moment Mosi thought she might stay silent. Instead she said, "Because she saw him on television." Mosi stared. She saw him speaking about family legacy. Amara continued, every word clearly dragged through humiliation. She heard the name Adebayo. She saw his face. And she would not stop asking why her father had his eyes. A chill slid down Mosi's spine. The room had quieted enough now that every syllable landed cleanly. Imani looked up innocently. "Mama said Daddy is with God. But Daddy told stories about his father. He said his father was strong and stubborn and never listened." She frowned at Mosi as if evaluating him. "You do look stubborn." A few shocked laughs broke from the audience before dying under Zuri's glare. Mosi did not laugh. He could not. Because for one terrible instant he heard Cabello in the child's voice. Not literally, not in sound, in spirit, in reckless honesty. Zuri stepped in again, colder now. "This child has been coached." "No," said Amara, and the single word cracked with pain. "If I had coached her, I would have taught her to stay silent." That line struck the room harder than any scream. Mosi saw several guests glance at one another. The story was shifting. Sympathy, once impossible, had found a crack. Tendai sensed it too. "Sir, with respect, this is exactly why we need to handle this privately." Privately. Yes. At last a useful word. Mosi drew a slow breath, forcing his pulse down. His mind was moving again now, though every thought felt dangerous. The pendant. Cabello's name. The child's face. The impossible timing. The public humiliation waiting to swallow all of them. He looked from Imani to Amara, then at the sea of recording phones. "This event is over," he said. The room jolted. A board member half rose from his seat. "Mosi, I said it is over." Nobody argued a second time. He turned to Tendai. "Clear the ballroom. No press near the west corridor. No one follows us." Then he faced Amara. "Come with me," he said. Amara did not move. Why? The question was not defiant. It was wounded. Mosi answered with the only honesty he had. "Because if that pendant is what I think it is, then tonight someone is finally going to tell me the truth." Imani slipped her small hand into her mother's, and across the glittering ballroom where his reputation had just cracked open in front of the world, Mosi Adebayo realized that whatever came next would not merely threaten his family's name. It would drag the dead back into the light. Ketithuk phn hai. Tipik yeo guvi td motngin den motngin hai trum t teo quid nh thought for a second. PHN Bar, the private lounge behind the ballroom, had been designed for power. Its walls were panelled in dark wood imported from Ghana. Its carpets were thick enough to silence footsteps. Framed photographs of presidents, royalty, and donors lined the corridor, leading in each image carefully chosen to remind visitors that Mosi Adebayo did not simply move through African influence, he helped shape it. Tonight, the room felt like a courtroom. No one sat at first. Amara remained near the door with Imani close against her side, as if the polished leather sofas and crystal lamps were dangerous objects disguised as luxury. Tendai stood by the bar console, tense and watchful, clutching his tablet like a shield. Zuri positioned herself near Mosi, but not too near her face, composed her silence more cutting than speech. Mosi stood in the center of it all, still seeing the gold lion pendant every time he blinked. "Sit," he said at last. Amara did not. Imani did, though, only because she seemed too young to understand the weight pressing on every adult in the room. She climbed carefully onto the edge of the sofa, her dusty sandals dangling above the carpet, and looked around with quiet curiosity. A child in a room built by men who never expected a child like her to enter it. Mosi turned to Tendai. "Leave us." Tendai hesitated. "Sir." "Not far, just outside the door." Zuri crossed her arms. "That is reckless." Mosi did not look at her. Outside. Tendai obeyed first. Zuri waited 2 beats longer, as if testing whether she still held any power over the moment. Then, with a face like carved stone, she stepped into the corridor after him. The door closed. The lounge softened into a thick silence. Only then did Mosi speak again. "What is your name?" Amara lifted her chin. "Amara Ndlovu." The surname struck him faintly. Not from personal memory, from something older. A buried conversation, a report, a furious night years ago when voices had risen behind closed doors and his mother had declared that a certain girl would never enter their family alive. He had not listened enough then, or perhaps he had listened and chosen comfort over truth. Tonight he could no longer tell which was worse. And the child Imani answered for herself. "Imani," Mosi nodded slowly. "How old are you, Imani? 6? 6. The number landed like a blow. 6 years meant conception before Kabelo's death, not after it. No room for games, no easy dismissal, no convenient lie that the child belonged to another man and had simply been pushed toward wealth. Mosi felt the room narrowing around him. Amara saw it. "That is why I never came before," she said quietly, "because once you counted the years it would become real." Mosi looked at her sharply. "Then start at the beginning." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her worn handbag. For a moment she looked younger, not in age, but in pain, like a woman who had been dragged backward through time to the place where everything broke. "I met Kabelo 8 years ago," she said, "at a legal aid clinic in Hillbrow." Mosi frowned. "A legal aid clinic." A brief, bitter smile touched her mouth. "Yes. Your son had a habit of showing up in places rich men's sons are not expected to go." That at least sounded true. He remembered those years well now. Kabelo refusing the easy executive track Mosi had laid out for him. Kabelo arguing at dinner about labor abuse, housing injustice, police extortion, corrupt contracts. Kabelo saying that wealth without conscience was only another kind of violence. They had fought often, loudly, publicly in the family home where every servant could hear. Mosi had called it youthful arrogance. His mother had called it contamination, Amara continued. "I was translating documents for women who could not afford lawyers. Kabelo was volunteering there because one of his friends asked him to help review cases. He was not like the others." She swallowed. He did not speak to poor people as if they should be grateful for his attention. Imani watched her mother's face with serious eyes, as if she had heard pieces of this story before, but never its full shape. "At first I did not know who he was," Amara said. "He never introduced himself as your son. He was just Kabelo." Mosi could picture it too easily. His son in rolled-up sleeves, expensive watch hidden beneath an ordinary shirt, smiling in that disarming way that made people trust him before they understood why. "He told me the truth after 3 weeks," Amara said. "He said if I chose to hate him for his family name, he would deserve it, but he would rather lose me honestly than keep me through a lie." Mosi looked away. "Lose me honestly?" It was exactly the kind of line Kabelo would have said. Too earnest. Too open, too vulnerable for a world trained to punish men for such things. "How long were you together?" Mosi asked. "Almost a year. A year. A whole hidden year in his own city, in his own orbit, under the shadow of his name, and he had known nothing. Or had he? Fragments began to surface. Kabelo arriving late to family events, distracted and glowing, in a way Mosi had dismissed as youthful romance. His mother's private calls, Nala's sharpened interest in whom Kabelo was seeing. The day Kabelo appeared at Sunday lunch with a split lip and refused to explain how he got it. Mosi had assumed it was some political protest gone wrong. Had it already been about Amara? "When did my family find out?" Mosi asked. Amara gave him a look he could not endure for long. "Your mother found out first." The answer dropped between them like cold iron. Of course she had. Mosi's late mother, Salima Adebayo, had built elegance out of control. She could discover a secret pregnancy, a hidden debt, a housemaid's sick mother, a senator's affair, all before breakfast. Nothing crossed her threshold unnoticed, least of all a poor woman near her only grandson. "She sent for me," Amara said. Not to the house. To a hotel suite. That way, if I made a scene, no one would connect it to the family. The precision of it made Mosey's stomach turn. She offered me money first, Amara said. A lot of money. More than I had ever seen in one room. She said girls like me were always practical in the end. Imani frowned. Mama hates when people call her girl. Amara managed a tiny smile at her daughter, then went on. I told her I loved her son, and I was not for sale. Mosey did not know which emotion struck first, pride in a stranger's courage, or shame at the family that had demanded it. What did my mother do then? She stopped pretending to be polite. Amara's voice had gone flat now, which somehow made it worse. She said women like me did not love men like Cabello. We hunted them. She said if I cared for him at all, I would leave before I ruined him. She said his future had already been arranged, his career, his marriage, his place in the company, and that I was a stain that would be cleaned one way or another. Mosey closed his eyes briefly. Yes, that sounded like Salima too. Not because she lacked love, but because her love had always been sharpened into domination. To protect in her mind was to control. To preserve the family was to prune away anything unpredictable, especially human hearts. I told Cabello, Amara said. I wanted him to know the truth. He became furious. Not at me. At them. Mosey opened his eyes. He confronted us. Amara nodded. He said he would marry me. He said he was done letting his family decide which parts of him were acceptable. Mosey remembered that dinner now as if a curtain had been torn down. Cabello standing at the far end of the table, jaw rigid, one hand planted on polished wood. Nala accusing him of rebellion for its own sake. Salima speaking in that deadly soft tone she used when she believed humiliation was more effective than rage. Mosey himself saying, You are throwing away your future for a girl you barely know. A girl. He had used the same word. Not a woman. Not a person. A category. A dismissal. And Cabello had looked at him with such disappointment that it had felt even then like something sacred closing. Amara's next words came softly. He told me afterward that he could survive losing money. Status, inheritance, all of it. But he did not think he could survive becoming the kind of man who betrayed the truth, because powerful people made lying comfortable. Mosey sat down heavily at last. His son was returning now in sentences, not as a body in a coffin, not as a framed photograph, as a living moral wound. Amara looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. 3 weeks later, Cabello died. The room went still. Imani lowered her eyes. Mosey's voice came out rougher than he intended. The crash was investigated. No, Amara said. It was buried. He looked up sharply. She reached into her handbag with trembling hands and withdrew an old envelope, the edges softened by years of handling. Inside were photographs, a clinic bracelet, a folded note. Mosey stared at the note first. It was in Cabello's handwriting. If anything happens, go to my father. He felt the air leave his body. Amara's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. I tried, she said, and your family made sure I never reached you. Mosey looked from the note to the child sitting silently on the sofa, then back to the woman his family had erased. And for the first time since Imani had called him grandpa, he understood that tonight was not about a shocking child or a public scandal. It was about a name that had been cut out of his family's history, a woman they had called unworthy, a son they had failed, and a truth that had been hunted for 6 years and had finally walked into his ballroom wearing dusty sandals and a gold lion pendant. For a long time after Amara placed the note in his hand, Mosey could not speak. The paper was old, creased and fragile at the folds, but Cabello's handwriting had survived the years with cruel clarity. The same strong slant, the same impatient pressure on the downstrokes. Mosey had seen that hand on school essays, on angry letters from university, on signatures authorizing donations to causes his family considered radical and embarrassing. He had once joked that Cabello wrote as if he were arguing with the page itself. Now that same handwriting seemed to rise from the dead. "If anything happens, go to my father." Mosi read the sentence again and again. The pain of it did not come all at once. It arrived in layers, each one more humiliating than the last. First came the shock that Cabello had trusted him. Then came the horror that Amara had tried to obey. And beneath both lay the ugliest wound of all the possibility that his son had believed Mosi might still choose what was right even after everything, and that Mosi had failed him without ever knowing he was being tested. He lowered the note carefully. When he asked, Amara looked exhausted now, but there was no retreat in her face. She had crossed too much darkness to turn back inside a polished room. 2 days after the crash. "You came to my house?" "Yes." Mosi swallowed, and Amara gave a small, humorless laugh that held no joy. "Your sister met me at the gate." "Nala." The name flashed through him like a splintered blade. Amara continued before he could interrupt. "She did not let me inside. She did not even let me finish saying Cabello's name. She looked at my stomach, looked at my face, and knew exactly why I had come." Imani's eyes widened. "She knew about me." Amara turned to her daughter at once, gentling her voice. "Not about you, little bird, not yet. You were still only hope then." Little bird. The tenderness in that phrase cut Mosi more deeply than any accusation. Because the room was full of evidence that Amara had survived by making herself hard, yet every time she turned to the child, she became soft without even thinking about it. There was no calculation in her, no hunger for status, no trace of the manipulative woman his family had once described with such certainty. Mosi's jaw tightened. "What did Nala say?" "She said I was shameless." Amara's voice remained even, which somehow made the cruelty more vivid. "She said Cabello was dead, and dead men could not defend themselves against lies. She said if I wanted money, there were discreet ways to ask for it, but if I wanted to blackmail the Adebayo family with a bastard child, I would regret it." Mosi flinched. Imani, too young to understand every word, still sensed the poison in the room, and climbed off the sofa to stand beside her mother again. Amara reached down and held her hand before continuing. "I told her I was not there for money. I showed her the note. I said your son told me to come to you if anything happened." She laughed in my face. Mosi stared at the floor. He could see Nala doing it, could hear it. That low, dismissive laugh she used when she believed morality was sentimental weakness. He had always excused it as hardness learned from their mother. Family style, family survival. Tonight it sounded like rot passed down as inheritance. "She took the note," Amara said. Mosi looked up sharply. "What?" "She snatched it from my hand and said I had forged it. Then she tore it." Mosi's eyes dropped to the paper in his hand. The line across the center, the taped seam on the back, the slight misalignment he had not noticed through the shock. Amara saw him understand. "I picked up the pieces from the driveway after her guard pushed me back through the gate," she said. "That is why it is taped." Something cold moved through Mosi's chest. "What guard? The one in the grey suit? Heavy set, scar above the eyebrow. He said if I returned, the police would be told I was stalking a grieving family." Mosi knew exactly which man she meant. Otieno. Long-time family security. Loyal, efficient, silent. He had retired 3 years ago with a generous pension and a house on the coast. Retired. Or rewarded. Mosi stood abruptly and crossed to the far side of the room, the note clenched in one hand. The city lights beyond the window glittered against the dark, distant, and indifferent. Down below, cars slid along the avenue like threads of white fire. From this height, Everything looked orderly, designed, controlled. But beneath that surface tonight, history was opening like a wound. He turned back. He turned. "Why did you disappear after that?" he asked. "If you knew the truth, why not go to the police, to the press, to a lawyer?" Amara held his gaze. "Because I was 24, pregnant, broke, and alone." The answer landed with devastating simplicity. She went on. "And because 2 nights after I came to your gate, men followed me home." Zuri, who had silently re-entered at some point during the conversation, sucked in a breath from near the door. Mosi had not even noticed her return. Tendai stood behind her now, listening with the rigid stillness of a man who understood that law and scandal had begun to merge. Amara glanced at neither of them. She was beyond embarrassment now. "I was renting one room behind a woman's house in Yeovil," she said. "At first I thought I was imagining it. A black sedan parked too long on the corner. A man reading a newspaper who never turned the page. Footsteps behind me after sunset. Then one night someone broke into my room." Mosi felt every muscle in his back tighten. "They did not take the television," she said. "They did not take my bag. They only searched. They turned over the mattress, emptied drawers, ripped open the lining of my suitcase. They were looking for documents. The note, the clinic records, anything that tied her to Cabello. I left before dawn," Amara said. "I took a bus to my aunt in Soweto. 3 weeks later, a man I had never seen before came into the shop where I had started working and asked whether I was the girl who knew better than to return." Tendai's face changed. The legal officer in him was cataloguing everything now. Threats, harassment, witness intimidation, possible conspiracy. Mosi saw it in the tightness around his mouth. Amara did not stop. "I moved again, and again. Every time I tried to stay in one place for longer than a few months, something happened. Landlords suddenly changed their minds. Employers let me go without explanation. Once a social worker told me someone had called to say I was unstable and unfit to raise a child." Imani pressed closer to her mother. Mosi could barely breathe. "How did you survive?" he asked quietly. Amara gave a small shrug that was more heartbreaking than tears. "The way poor women survive when powerful people want them erased. By becoming difficult to pin down. By trusting almost no one. By learning to leave before being pushed. By keeping the child alive even when fear becomes part of the air in the room." No one spoke for several seconds after that. The silence was interrupted only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant muffled sounds of the gala being dismantled beyond the corridor. Somewhere staff were clearing glass folding linen, wheeling away centerpieces that had hours earlier been arranged for celebration. Now the night smelled of exposure. Zuri was the first to speak. "This is a very serious story," she said carefully. "But a story is not evidence." Mosi turned his head slowly. There it was again, that instinctive need to reduce, reframe, contain. Zuri's tone was polished, rational, almost sympathetic on the surface, but underneath it lay the same calculation he had begun to notice earlier in the ballroom. Not concern for truth, concern for damage. Amara's face closed at once. "I did not come here for you to believe me," she said. "I came because my daughter deserves to stop wondering why the truth feels like a crime." Imani looked up at Mosi. "Mama said secrets make people sick." The child said it with such plain sincerity that no adult in the room had the strength to answer. Mosi looked at Tendai. "We need verification." Tendai nodded, immediately relieved perhaps to return to procedures. "DNA testing can be arranged tonight. Quietly. Chain of custody secured. We can use the private clinic on retainer." Zuri stepped forward. "Mosi, think. If this leaks before we control it..." "Someone already leaked that they were here," Mosi said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Someone inside my company or my household did that within minutes." Zuri went still. So did Tendai, because that was the part no one could soften. The press had arrived too quickly. Social media had lit up too fast. There had been cameras in the ballroom, yes, but the first whispers online had framed Amara, not as an unknown woman, but as a possible extortionist. That language had come from somewhere close, somewhere prepared. Amara saw the realization pass between them. "You still do not understand," she said. "The worst part is not what your family did years ago. The worst part is that someone is still protecting it." The sentence settled over the room like a fresh storm. Mosi felt it instantly, not as abstract suspicion, but as structure, pattern, continuity. This had not been one act of cruelty buried in the past. It had been maintained, fed, guarded. He looked at Tendai. "From this moment on, no one outside this room is to access internal surveillance from tonight, security logs, guest communications, or staff records without my direct authorization." "Yes, sir. Pull all archived files related to Cabelo's accident. Every version, every memo, every internal communication." Tendai hesitated only once. "Some of those records may have been sealed by family order. Then unseal them." Zuri stepped closer, abandoning composure now. "You are reacting emotionally." Mosi faced her fully. "Yes," he said. "My dead son may have left behind a child while people carrying my name hunted her mother across this city. Emotion is the only sane response left." That shut the room still. He turned back to Amara. "I am ordering the DNA test tonight," he said, "and I am assigning protection to you and Imani." Amara's whole body stiffened. No men in black suits. A brutal detail. Small. Specific. True. Mosi nodded once. "Then not my usual team. Women only. Off books until I know who to trust." For the first time since entering the building, Amara looked almost unsteady, not from fear this time, but from the shock of being believed even halfway. Imani tilted her head. "Does that mean we are not in trouble?" Mosi looked at her, at the little gold lion resting against her chest, at the eyes that held too much of Cabello when they should have belonged only to a child. "No," he said, his voice roughening. "It means someone else may be." And in the silence that followed, every adult in the room understood the same thing. The DNA test would answer one question, but it would also awaken everyone who had spent 6 years making sure the truth never reached Mosi Adebayo. The private medical suite on the 19th floor did not look like a place where lives were overturned. It was quiet, white expensive, and cold in the way only elite clinics could be. The scent of antiseptic floated beneath the hum of filtered air. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, as if beauty could soften what happened inside rooms where blood told the truth more mercilessly than people ever did. Imani sat on the edge of the examination chair, swinging her legs, trying very hard to be brave. Amara stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. Her face was calm now, in the stubborn, exhausted way of someone who had crossed so much fear that fresh fear had nowhere left to land. Mosi stood a few feet away, jacket removed, tie loosened, feeling older with every passing minute. Tendai had arranged everything exactly as promised. The lab team had been called in under confidentiality orders. The chain of custody was documented, photographed, witnessed. No outside names, no family staff. No one except the clinic director, one senior technician, a nurse, Tendi, Mosi, Amara, and Imani. Still, the room felt crowded with ghosts. The nurse crouched down in front of Imani. "It will only sting a little." Imani looked at the needle, then at Mosi. "Do rich people's tests hurt less?" she asked. The nurse blinked. Tendai cleared his throat, almost choking back an awkward laugh. Mosi, despite everything, felt something break open in his chest that was not pain alone. "No," he said quietly. "They should, but they do not." Imani considered this with great seriousness. "That seems unfair." "Yes," Mosi said. "It is." She nodded as if he had passed some invisible exam, then turned back to the nurse. Okay, but do mine first so Mama does not worry. Amara closed her eyes for 1 second. Mosi looked away. The blood draw itself took less than 5 minutes. The child winced, but did not cry. Amara was next steady and silent, staring at the ceiling. When the nurse turned toward Mosi, he rolled up his sleeve without a word. As the needle entered his arm, he remembered the first time he had held Kabalo in a hospital room 32 years earlier. Salima had been pale and furious at the pain, then suddenly weeping with startled tenderness when the baby opened his eyes. Mosi had stood there young and terrified, feeling the fragile weight of his son, and promising silently that he would build a world too strong for harm to reach him. He had built the strength. He had failed at the protection. By the time the samples were sealed and taken to the lab, it was past midnight. Tendai approached with his tablet. The preliminary comparison can be expedited. We should have the first confirmed probability range within 2 hours. 2 hours, Mosi repeated. It sounded absurd that 6 years of silence, 8 years of buried history, and the shape of his son's afterlife could collapse into 2 hours of waiting. Amara sat with Imani in the corner of the suite's private waiting area after the blood draw. Someone had brought juice sandwiches, biscuits, things chosen by people accustomed to solving discomfort with trays. Imani accepted the juice gratefully. Amara touched nothing. Mosi noticed. "You should eat," he said. Amara did not look at him. "I have lived through worse nights than this." That is not an answer. Her gaze lifted then sharp and tired. It is the only one I have energy for. He accepted the rebuke because he had earned it. Imani sipped from the straw, watching both adults with the solemn intelligence children often carried when they had grown up around unstable moods. "Mama eats when she feels safe," she said. The statement was simple. Its effect was not. Something shifted in Amara's expression, a flash of embarrassment at being known so clearly by her child. Mosi felt shame move through him again, not because of anything he had done in that exact moment, but because safety itself had become a luxury around his name. He walked to the window at the far end of the suite. Below, the city spread wide beneath the dark roads striped with headlights. Office towers still lit on upper floors, neighborhoods gathering into shadow where workers were already asleep before dawn's struggle began again. Johannesburg was a city of glitter and fracture, ambition and hunger, beauty and predation. Mosi had loved it all his life because it rewarded force. Tonight it looked like a machine large enough to hide any crime if the right people kept feeding it. Behind him the door opened. Zuri entered without waiting to be invited. Tendai moved at once. "This area is restricted. I am not here as the press." Zuri said coolly. "I am here as the woman whose engagement is about to be dragged through every gutter headline on the continent." Her eyes found Mosi. "May we speak?" "No," said Amara. The bluntness of it froze the room. Zuri's head turned slowly toward her. "I was not speaking to you." "No," Amara repeated, rising to her feet. "But you have been speaking around me all night as if I am a stain and not a human being. So let me make it easier. If you want to discuss the market value of your embarrassment, do it somewhere my daughter cannot hear you." Tendai looked down instantly. Even the nurse at the far desk became very interested in some papers that did not need arranging. Zuri's face tightened. "You presume a great deal." Amara let out a thin breath. "And you reveal a great deal." Mosi had watched powerful people for most of his life. He knew when anger came from fear, when cruelty came from pride, when politeness came from strategy. Zuri, standing there in a gown that still shimmered from the gala, looked less like a wounded fiancé than a woman furious that a scandal was slipping beyond her control. He had not wanted to see it earlier. Now he could not unsee it. "Tendai," he said, without taking his eyes off Zuri. "Please escort Ms. Dlamini out of the restricted area." Zuri stared at him. Ms. Delamini. The formality landed exactly where he intended. Mosi, she said, voice low and dangerous. Be careful. A desperate woman with a child and a family story is the oldest extortion script in the world. Imani frowned. What is extortion? Amara bent immediately. Nothing for you to worry about. But the child was already looking at Mosi waiting, and suddenly he understood that children like her learned the world not from definitions but from tone, from the way people said words at their mothers, from the way wealth made contempt sound educated. It means trying to force someone to give you money with lies, he said. Imani's eyes widened. But Mama did not ask for money. No, Mosi said. Zuri gave a short, incredulous laugh. You are taking their side before the results even come back. Mosi turned toward her fully. No, I am taking the side of what has not lied to me tonight. For the first time since the ballroom, Zuri had no immediate response. Tendai stepped closer. This way, please. She left with a face like polished glass. When the door shut behind her, silence settled over the waiting area again, heavier now, but cleaner. Imani finished her juice. She does not like us. Children did not hedge. Amara brushed a hand over the girl's hair. Some people fear what changes their plans. Imani absorbed that too. Mosi remained by the window thinking of plans, of marriages aligned for prestige, of inheritance structures, of board succession, of the quiet assumptions powerful families made about who counted and who did not. If Imani was truly Cabelo's daughter, then she was not just a child. She was disruption. She was bloodline. She was proof that the family's old narrative had been a lie. She was also a threat to every arrangement built on that lie. No wonder someone had tried to erase her before she could even be born. An hour later, the clinic director returned. The woman was usually unshakable, a surgeon who had once operated through a city-wide blackout by generator light and never raised her voice. Tonight, even she looked cautious. We have the preliminary results, she said. Nobody sat. Nobody breathed properly either. The direct line kinship probability between Mr. Adebayo and the child is above 99.9%. The room dissolved into silence so complete it seemed to push the walls farther apart. Mosi did not react at first because his body did not know how. The words entered him slowly, like cold water flooding stone. Above 99.9%. Not possible. Not likely. Not maybe. His granddaughter. Cabelo's child. Real. At the far side of the room, Amara closed her eyes and bowed her head. Not in triumph. In release. As if a weight she had carried alone for 6 years had finally shifted, even if only by an inch. Imani looked from face to face. Is that good? The clinic director softened. It means he really is your grandfather. Imani blinked once, twice, then turned toward Mosi with a smile so sudden and bright that it nearly undid him. I told you, she said. That was all. Not accusation, not performance, not victory. Simple child certainty. Mosi's vision blurred. He had not cried in public since Cabelo's funeral. Even then the tears had been private controlled, permitted only in fragments between calls, arrangements, condolences, and speeches. Grief had become posture long before it became healing. Now it came back raw. He crossed the room before he fully decided to move and stopped in front of Imani. For a second he only looked at her. The curve of her cheeks, the seriousness in her eyes, the lion pendant against her chest. 6 years lost. 6 years stolen. 6 years in which she had scraped her knees, learned to speak, fallen asleep, afraid, asked questions about her father, and lived every one of those moments without him knowing she existed. Slowly, as though asking permission of something sacred, Mosi knelt. Imani tilted her head. "Are you sad?" "Yes," he said honestly, "and very glad, both at the same time." She considered that. "Adults are strange." A broken laugh escaped him. Then, to his own astonishment, Imani stepped forward and put her small hand on his cheek. Amara made a sound that was not quite a sob. Mosi looked up at her. There was no victory in her expression either, only exhaustion, pain, and something far more devastating than blame. Distance. The DNA result had confirmed blood. It had not repaired trust. And Mosi understood that at once. He rose slowly to his feet. "Tendai." "Yes, sir. From this moment forward, all protection and resources for Amara and Imani come directly from my office." Quietly. "No media, no board notification yet." "Yes, sir. And begin a full review of every archived file connected to Kabelo's death. My mother's private accounts, my sister's discretionary funds, and any payments made to security personnel in the 6 months before and after the crash." Tendai's eyes flickered. "Understood." Amara looked at him sharply. "You believe me now?" It was not a question. Mosi held her gaze. "About the child, yes." Her face hardened. "Only the child." He did not lie. "I believe enough to know someone stole the truth from all of us." That answer hung between them. Not enough for forgiveness, enough for war. And as the first official DNA report printed in the lab down the corridor, Mosi Adebayo realized that the result he had prayed for and dreaded in equal measure was only the beginning. Because now the truth had a name, a face, and legal proof. Now whoever had buried Kabelo's legacy would know that the child they failed to erase had been recognized, and people who protect old crimes rarely surrender quietly. By 3 a.m, the clinic had gone so quiet that every small sound felt amplified. The printer down the hall clicked once and fell silent. A nurse wheeled an empty cart past the door with careful, respectful slowness. Somewhere beyond the glass corridor, a cleaner buffed the floor in steady circles, the machine's low hum rising and fading like distant thunder. Inside the waiting suite, no one truly rested. Imani had finally fallen asleep, curled against Amara's side on the sofa, one hand still fisted in the fabric of her mother's dress, as if even in sleep she feared waking in the wrong life. Amara did not move except to adjust the child's head now and then. Her body was still but not relaxed. Mosi could see the strain in the angle of her shoulders, the way alertness remained in her even after exhaustion had taken everything else. Tendai stood near the door reading from his tablet, with the brittle concentration of a man who understood he had crossed from corporate crisis into family ruin. The clinic director had left the formal report in a sealed folder on the side table, but none of them needed to read it again. The numbers had already detonated in the room. Mosi had spent the last hour making calls from the corridor. Not to the board, not to the press, to the dead. That was how it felt. He had called his private archivist and ordered every internal file connected to Kabelo's fatal crash to be released for immediate review. He had called the old insurance liaison and demanded the original claims assessments, not the polished summaries prepared for legal review. He had called his late mother's estate office and instructed them to freeze access to discretionary records until morning. Each command had been delivered in the same calm voice he used when closing acquisitions. Only his hands had betrayed him. Now back inside the waiting area, he stood by the window again, the city thinning toward dawn, and forced himself to remember the week of Kabelo's death exactly as it had happened. The official story had been simple. Too simple. Kabelo's car had gone off the M1 in heavy rain just past midnight. There had been no second passenger. The brakes had supposedly failed, though later reports softened that into possible mechanical compromise exacerbated by road conditions. The police had closed the matter quickly. The newspapers had treated it as tragedy, sharpened by irony, idealistic air, reckless driving, life cut short. His mother had insisted on a private burial with limited press access. Nala had handled most communications. Mosey, half destroyed by grief and half sedated by rage, had signed whatever was placed in front of him. Tonight that memory no longer felt like mourning. It felt like evidence of negligence or cowardice. He heard Amara's voice behind him. "You were not supposed to know this way." He turned. She had not stood up. She sat with Imani sleeping beside her eyes, fixed on the dark window opposite him rather than on his face. "How was I supposed to know?" he asked. Amara's mouth tightened. "Cabello did not want your daughter-in-law discovered by security in a ballroom." The word landed strangely in the room, not because she claimed it, because she used it in the past tense of possibility, as if naming what might have been and what never became were the same kind of grief. Mosey crossed to the chair opposite the sofa and sat for the first time since the test result. "Then tell me how he planned it." Amara was silent for a while. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Softer. Not because the subject hurt less, but because it belonged to Cabello. "He wanted to come to you after the funeral period ended," she said. "Not immediately. He said grief made powerful families crueler than usual, and he wanted the house calmer before he brought me there." Mosey let out a breath that almost became a bitter laugh. "He knew us well." "Yes," she said. "He did. No accusation. Only fact." "He said you were proud," she continued, "and often blind when your mother and sister were involved. But he also said you respected courage when it stood in front of you long enough." Mosey looked down. That sounded like his son, too fierce enough to judge him generous enough to leave a door open anyway. "He was going to tell you about the baby." Amara placed her palm over the sleeping child's back. "I found out 2 weeks before he died. He was shocked, then happy, then scared, then happy again." The picture rose painfully clear. Cabello pacing, laughing once in disbelief, running both hands over his face, then planning, always planning how to protect, how to speak honestly, how not to let power dictate love's terms. "What happened the night he died?" Mosey asked. Amara's face changed at once. Not into tears, into vigilance. "I received a call from him around 11:30, she said. He sounded angry. "Not with me. Urgent. He said, 'If anyone asks you, do not know where I am going.'" Mosey's body stilled. "He never spoke to me like that," Amara said. "Not with secrets between us." I asked what was wrong. He said he had just learned that someone had paid a mechanic to tamper with his car a week earlier, but the work had not been completed because the mechanic got scared and backed out. Tendai lifted his head from across the room. Mosey did not turn. "Did he name who told him?" "He only said the man was frightened and wanted money to disappear. Cabello said he was going to meet him." At midnight, Tendai asked before he could stop himself. Amara nodded. "I begged him not to go alone. He said if he involved the police too early, whoever was behind it would destroy the evidence." Mosey's hands clenched on his knees. That was Cabello's fatal flaw. Brave, intelligent, morally clear, and far too willing to believe that if he moved fast enough, truth could outrun corruption. "What happened next?" Mosey asked. "He called again at 11:52. I remember because I stared at the time for hours afterward." Her voice stayed level through visible effort. "He said if anything happened, I was to go to you." Then he said something else. Mosey waited. Amara looked at him directly for the first time in several minutes. He said, "If this reaches the house before I do, trust no one there but my father." The sentence entered Mosey like a knife. Not just because Cabello had trusted him, because Cabello had distrusted the rest. Fully, explicitly, enough to speak it aloud minutes before his death. Tendai moved closer. "Ms. Ndlovu, why didn't you tell police this at the time?" Amara's expression hardened. Because by dawn the newspapers already said Cabello had died alone after a night of drinking. Because when I went to the precinct nearest my room, the officer on duty asked how much the Adebayo family was paying me to perform. Because by afternoon men were following me. Tendai's face shut tight again. Mosi rose abruptly and walked to the far wall where a framed, abstract canvas hung in gold and rust. For one wild second he wanted to drive his fist through it, through the wall, through every polished surface built over the skeleton of his own ignorance. Instead he asked without turning, "The mechanic. Do you know his name?" Amara shook her head. "No, Cabello never said it." Tendai was already typing. "I can pull service records for his vehicles around that time. Off-book maintenance private garage, visits cash transfers to contractors. Something may surface." "Do it," Mosi said. "Yes, sir." At that exact moment, the phone in Mosi's hand vibrated. He looked down. Unknown number. For a second he almost ignored it. Then instinct prickled. He answered. "This is Mosi Adebayo." A male voice came through low and distorted as if spoken through cloth. "You should have let the girl leave." Every muscle in Mosi's body locked. "Who is this?" The man ignored the question. "Some graves stay closed because opening them poisons everyone still living." The line went dead. For one beat the room remained frozen in its previous shape, as if the words had not yet reached the others. Then Tendai saw Mosi's face. What happened? Mosi lowered the phone slowly. Someone just called to warn me. Amara stood so fast Imani stirred in her sleep. "I told you." Her voice was not triumphant. It was furious with terror. "I told you someone was still protecting this." Mosi nodded once. The warning had done more than frighten him. It had clarified the air. The attack was no longer theoretical, no longer locked in archive boxes and dead memories. It was active, present tense, listening. He turned to Tendai. "Trace it. I'll need cyber. Use whoever you trust, least publicly and most privately." Tendai understood at once and moved into the corridor to make the call. Imani blinked awake, confused. Mama Amara gathered her close. "It's all right." No, Mosi said quietly. "It is not." Both women looked at him. He rarely corrected comforting lies. Tonight he could no longer bear them. He crouched to Imani's eye level. "Someone is frightened because the truth came out. That means we have to be careful. But it also means your mother was right." Imani looked sleepy, but intent. "About secrets making people sick?" "Yes," Mosi said. "And dangerous." She absorbed that without panic. Children who had lived around fear learned quickly which truths mattered. Tendai returned 10 minutes later, face grim. The call was routed through layered masking. Disposable, but not random. Whoever did it knew your private number. That answer chilled the room more than the threat itself. Not an outsider. Someone with access. Someone close enough to the family, the office, or the old inner circle to reach lines that ordinary people could not. Mosi straightened slowly. Then the circle narrows. He began issuing orders at once. "Tendai, I want a complete list of everyone with historical access to my personal numbers. Residence logs, private security channels, and my late mother's estate office." "Yes, sir." "Also every surviving member of the household staff from 6 years ago. Drivers, guards, assistants, legal runners, everyone." "Yes, sir." He turned to Amara. "You and Imani are not going back to your current address." Her reaction was immediate. "No hidden safe house owned by your family." "Then name somewhere you would trust." "I do not trust places," she said. "I trust patterns. And powerful people find patterns." Mosi almost argued. Then he realized she was right. So he did the harder thing. He listened. "Fine," he said. "Then you choose the first location. My people only secure the perimeter after you arrive, and only women you approve will come near the child." Amara studied him. Not warmly, not with forgiveness, but with the first flicker of reluctant reassessment. "You are trying," she said. It was not praise, it was a measured observation. "I am late," Mosi replied. "Trying is the smallest debt I owe." That seemed to strike her, though she hid it quickly. Dawn had begun to bruise the skyline when Tendai's tablet chimed again. He glanced down, then looked up with sharpened eyes. "I found something," he said. Mosi held out his hand. Tendai passed him the screen. It was an archived maintenance invoice for one of Cabelo's cars dated 9 days before the crash. The work order had been cancelled. No reason listed. Payment method, cash advance drawn from a discretionary account tied not to Cabello, not to Mosi, but to Salima Adebayo's household office. Below it, in a scanned note from the garage manager, were 6 words that made the room go cold. Customer insisted family must not know. Mosi stared at the screen, then at the pale strip of dawn widening beyond the glass. His mother's office, a tampered car, a dead son, a warning call in the dark. And for the first time since Imani had entered the ballroom, one truth rose above all the others. The child was not merely evidence of a hidden inheritance. She was proof that whatever had happened to Cabello on the night he died had begun before the crash, and possibly inside his own family's shadow. The sun rose over Johannesburg without mercy. By 7 in the morning, the city was already awake. Taxis rattling through intersections, vendors pulling open shutters, office towers blinking alive, 1 floor at a time. To everyone outside, it was an ordinary day. To Mosi Adebayo, it felt like the first morning after a war had been declared inside his own bloodline. He had not slept. Neither had Tendai. Amara had agreed after an hour of tense negotiation to move with Imani to a temporary apartment owned not by the Adebayo family, but by an independent women's legal cooperative Mosi, quietly funded years ago and never publicly attached to himself. Amara had accepted only after Tendai produced documentation proving the apartment's ownership chain did not lead back to the company. 2 female security contractors, both former investigators, both personally vetted by the clinic director rather than by Mosi's household office, had accompanied them there at dawn. The child had fallen asleep in the car. Amara had not. Mosi watched their vehicle leave from the clinic's private garage and felt something unfamiliar settle in him. Not power, not control, but responsibility, sharpened by helplessness. He could order teams, freeze accounts, summon lawyers, shake boardrooms, but he could not undo 6 years of fear in a woman's body, nor 6 years of absence in a child's life. Now he sat in his private office on the 32nd floor of Adebayo Holdings, tie discarded collar open. The skyline spread behind him like a verdict. Across the desk, Tendai arranged files in precise rows. Paper, digital copies, scanned ledgers, internal memos, archived security logs, and in the center, printed separately as though it deserved its own gravity, the cancelled maintenance invoice tied to Salima Adebayo's household office. Mosi stared at it. His mother's name sat at the top of the page in soft corporate formatting, the kind designed to make atrocity look administrative. "You're certain it's genuine?" he asked. Tendai nodded, pulled from the garage's archived accounting server, and matched against the household office disbursement log. Same date, same amount. Cash advance authorized by the office administrator. Who was the administrator? Lindiwe Murray. Retired 2 years ago. Moved to the Western Cape. Alive, yes. Bring her in. Tendai hesitated. Quietly, Mosi's eyes lifted. There is no quiet left, only timing. Before Tendai could answer, the office door opened without permission. Nala entered, as if the building still belonged equally to her. She wore ivory silk dark glasses pushed into her hair, and the expression of a woman who had spent the drive rehearsing outrage as though it were a moral duty. Once years ago, people had called her the elegant spine of the Adebayo family. Today she looked exactly what she was, the keeper of its worst instincts. "I have been calling you for an hour," she said. Mosi did not invite her to sit. "My phone has been busy." "With what? Feeding gutter gossip? Entertaining extortionists?" Tendai went still. Mosi folded his hands on the desk. "Careful." Nala laughed once, sharp and unbelieving. "No, Mosi, you be careful. I wake up to 3 missed calls from donors asking whether you have publicly acknowledged a child from nowhere, and suddenly I am the one who should be careful." "She is not from nowhere." Nala's eyes narrowed. "You are already speaking like this." Mosi reached for the DNA report and slid it across the desk. She looked at it. For the first time since entering, some color left her face. But only some, because what replaced it was not grief. Calculation. She set the report down with deliberate calm. "DNA can be manipulated." Tendai inhaled through his nose, almost audibly. Mosi said nothing. Nala glanced at him, then at Tendai, and realized the room had moved past denial. She shifted tactics at once. "Fine," she said. "Let us suppose the child is Cabelo's. That proves nothing about the mother's story, nothing about blackmail, and certainly nothing about whatever madness has made you start tearing through family records like an auditor sent by enemies." Mosi picked up the maintenance invoice and held it up between 2 fingers. Nala's gaze flickered. It was a tiny thing. Half a second, but once seen it could never be unseen. "Do you want to explain this?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she removed her gloves finger by finger, buying time with elegance. "Mother handled many things through the household office. This payment was made 9 days before Cabelo's crash. That does not make it a murder order." "No," Mosi said. "It makes it a door. You may now tell me what lies behind it." Nala's jaw tightened. Tendai quietly activated the voice recorder on his tablet and laid it face down on the desk without comment. Not hidden, not announced, simply present. The morning light pressed against the glass walls. Nala finally sat. It was the first concession. "You are behaving as though you have just discovered our family is capable of ugliness," she said. "How charmingly late." Mosi did not move. She went on. "Yes, Mother knew about the girl. Yes, she despised the relationship. Yes, she believed Cabello would burn down everything built over 3 generations if he married beneath his world and let sentiment govern succession." "Succession?" Mosi repeated with quiet disgust. Nala met his gaze. "Do not pretend you did not think the same. You were simply softer in your language." The truth of it struck, because it contained enough accuracy to wound. Years ago he had not spoken with Salima's cruelty, but he had spoken with authority. He had framed his objections as prudence, stability, timing, reputation. He had not called Amara a stain. He had only treated her love as a complication. The difference mattered morally. It had not mattered enough practically. "What did Mother do?" he asked. Nala looked out at the city. She instructed Baraka to manage it. Baraka. Mosi felt the name land like a nail. Baraka Sefu had served as Salima's legal fixer for nearly 20 years, part attorney, part strategist, part discreet undertaker of problems respectable people wanted buried without fingerprints. He had resigned from all visible family roles after Salima's death, but continued handling estate matters through private channels. Manage what Mosi asked. The girl. The scandal. Cabello's defiance. Use plain words, Nala. Her face hardened. We meant to separate them. Tendai's fingers stopped moving over the tablet. Nala continued, perhaps because once one ugly truth emerges, the next comes faster. Baraka arranged surveillance. Nothing dramatic at first, just enough to know where Amara lived, who she spoke to, whether she could be persuaded to disappear in exchange for money. Mother still believed everyone had a price. When the money failed, she gave a bitter shrug. Other pressures were used. Mosi's voice dropped. The break-in, the threats, the landlords. Nala looked at him sharply. She told you all that? Yes. For the first time, something like uncertainty entered Nala's face. Not remorse, merely the discomfort of discovering how much the buried witness had survived. We did not order violence, she said. Is that what you tell yourself? We ordered containment. The word made Tendai flinch. Mosi leaned back slowly in his chair. Containment. Nala heard the contempt now and grew defensive. You think the world we live in is made of clean choices? It is not. Families like ours are hunted. One scandal, one unsuitable marriage, one heir deciding to play savior with the wrong woman, and suddenly vultures gather. Board members panic. Rivals whisper. Political allies pull away. We preserve what we can, or we lose everything. Mosi looked at her for a long, disbelieving moment. You are speaking about my son. I am speaking about survival. No, he said. You are speaking as if survival excuses whatever filth protected your comfort. Nala rose from the chair. Comfort. You think I did it for comfort? Her control cracked at last. I did it because Mother was dying and terrified that Cabello would hand the family to idealism and strangers. I did it because after Father died, you buried yourself in work and left her to carry the panic alone. I did it because someone had to think beyond love stories and principles and ask what would happen when the market smelled weakness. There it was, the family religion. Fear disguised as stewardship, power disguised as duty. Mosi stood too. And where in this holy mission of yours did my son's life fit? Nala's mouth opened, closed. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. It was not supposed to happen like that. The office went still. Tendai looked up sharply. Mosi felt the sentence before he understood it. Like what Nala's eyes flickered toward the recorder, then away. Baraka learned that Cabello had found someone at a garage willing to talk. The room chilled. He called me that night, she said, near midnight. He said Cabello was driving to meet the mechanic, and if the man spoke, everything Mother had set in motion would unravel. Mosi heard his own pulse in his ears. What had she set in motion? Nala hesitated. And that hesitation was answer enough, more than threats, more than gossip, more than social humiliation. Speak. Nala drew a breath. The mechanic had been paid to make Cabello believe his car had been tampered with. Tendai swore under his breath. Mosi did not. He had gone beyond profanity. They wanted to frighten him, Tendai asked. Nala gave one tight nod. Yes. To make him think enemies were circling, to push him into stepping back from the girl from the public fight with Mother from whatever reckless announcement he was planning. Mosi felt sick. Manufactured paranoia, staged danger, a psychological trap. And then he said, Nala's face changed. Baraka sent a driver to intercept the mechanic before Cabello reached him. She said, the plan was to buy the man's silence and remove the car so Cabello would never know whether the threat was real or imagined. Did it work? No. Why not? Because the driver panicked. Cabello arrived early. There was an argument on the roadside. The mechanic ran. Cabello followed in his car. It was raining. He took the curve too fast. Mosi stared at her. Rain? Curve. Crash. Not an assassin's bullet, not a cut brake line. Something crueler in its banality. A chain of manipulations that cornered a proud young man until fear and urgency drove him into death. You let the world call it an accident, Mosi said. Nala's voice turned brittle. It was an accident. No, he said. It was the final consequence of a campaign your mother built and you helped maintain. Nala's eyes flashed. Do not put all of this on me. You were there long before the crash, Mosi. You dismissed the girl. You dismissed Cabelo's warnings. You left Mother's machinery intact because it was useful when it served you. The truth struck. Hard. Enough truth to wound, not enough to absolve her. Mosi closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. Yes, he said. I did. Nala blinked. Perhaps she had expected denial. Counterattack. The old family dance of blame and deflection. What she got instead was something far more dangerous: acknowledgement. And because I did, Mosi continued, I will not protect you from the cost of what came after. For the first time that morning, Nala looked afraid. Real fear. Not social embarrassment, not strategic alarm. The fear of consequence finally stepping out of rumor and into the room. Mosi, no. He pressed the intercom on his desk. Security. A beat later, his chief of corporate security answered. Sir, escort Ms. Nala Adebayo to Conference Room C. She is not to leave the floor. Her devices are to be held pending legal review. Nala went white. You cannot detain me in my brother's office like some criminal. Mosi's voice was almost gentle. No, he said. But I can stop treating you like family while I learn how much of my son's death you helped bury. When the guards arrived, Nala drew herself up with old dignity, but it trembled at the edges now. She looked once at Tendai, once at the recorder, then back at Mosi. You are about to destroy us, she said. Mosi picked up the DNA report with one hand and the maintenance invoice with the other. No, he said. You already did. I am only opening the curtains. And as Nala was led from the office with the morning sun exposing every hard line in her face, Mosi understood the final cruelty of betrayal. The enemy had not entered the family. The family had manufactured the enemy, hunted the innocent, frightened the son, and then called the wreckage fate. By noon, the crisis could no longer be contained inside private offices and sealed corridors. Rumors had already begun crawling through the building like smoke under a door. Senior executives moved through the 32nd floor with practiced calm and frightened eyes. Assistants whispered in copy rooms. Security teams received revised instructions in clipped, coded language. Somewhere in the city, journalists were still pushing for confirmation that the girl from the ballroom was real. Somewhere else, board members were calculating risk. Mosi stopped caring about risk in the old way at exactly 12:17 p.m. That was the moment Baraka Seifu refused to come in voluntarily. Tendai stood across from Mosi in the smaller strategy room adjoining the office, one hand braced on the table, his tablet glowing with call logs, legal notes, and a list of emergency actions. He says he is unavailable for informal questioning and will only respond through counsel. Counsel, Mosi repeated. The word tasted rotten. Baraka had spent 20 years helping the Adebayo family avoid words like guilt fraud, intimidation, and liability. He had translated cruelty into language banks would respect. He had turned discretion into a profession. Now he was hiding behind the same machinery he once operated for others. Then bring him in through formal means, Mosi said. Tendai hesitated. That will trigger exposure. The board will know immediately. The board is going to know immediately anyway. And the police? Mosi's gaze sharpened. Not yet. That answer sat heavily between them. It was not mercy for Baraka. It was strategy. Mosi wanted one confrontation first, one room in which the full architecture of the lie could be exposed before lawyers began shredding accountability into technicalities. He wanted witnesses, not only from the legal side but from the family and the company. Too many people had hidden behind private conversations and dead women's shadows. That ended today. Set the family meeting, he said. Tendai looked up. You want everyone in one room? Yes. Executive board representatives too. Limited number. The people who need to understand what has been protected in this company's name. Tendai exhaled slowly. and Amara Mosi was silent for a second. Amara had spent years running from rooms arranged by powerful people. Asking her to walk into another one, even now, even with proof, felt dangerously close to repeating the same pattern under a better banner. Yet she had a right to be present. More than a right. A claim. She decides for herself, Mosi said. No pressure. Tendai nodded. An hour later, the conference room on the executive floor had been cleared of presentation screens and quarterly reports. The long walnut table remained, but the room no longer belonged to business. It belonged to history. Nala sat at one end, pale but controlled, flanked by 2 security personnel who had been instructed not to touch her unless she attempted to leave. She had changed nothing about her posture. Her spine remained straight, chin elevated, one hand resting calmly atop the other, as if dignity could still function as defense. 3 board members sat along the side, old men who had once admired Salima Adebayo's ruthlessness as leadership, and 1 younger woman whose face already showed moral revulsion, fighting corporate self-preservation. Tendai stood near the screen files ready. 2 external legal observers sat in silence. The company's chief compliance officer had been called in, white-faced and sweating. Zuri arrived late. She entered in a cream suit. Not a dress this time, looking less like a fiancé and more like a woman preparing for negotiations after a hostile takeover. Her eyes found Mosi immediately. "This is a mistake," she said. Mosi did not offer her a seat. "Sit down." She heard the finality in his voice and obeyed. Baraka came last. He was older than Mosi remembered, his silver hair thinner, his expression composed with the arrogance of a man who had survived too many scandals to believe this one would reach his bones. He entered with counsel beside him, placed his leather briefcase on the table, and said, "I assume we are here to prevent hysteria from becoming liability." The sentence altered the air. Several people in the room looked at him with fresh disgust. Mosi remained standing at the head of the table. "No," he said. "We are here because hysteria is what your kind names truth when it arrives too late." Baraka's eyes narrowed. Before he could answer, the door opened once more. Amara walked in with Imani beside her. The room froze. Mosi had not known until that instant whether she would come. She wore a plain, dark dress, nothing expensive, nothing styled for war or pity. Yet the moment she entered, the entire executive floor seemed to tilt toward her because she carried something no one else in the room possessed. The cost. She carried it in this way her shoulders stayed alert, in the way she scanned exits before faces, in the way one hand remained close to Imani, never gripping, always ready. Imani herself wore a yellow cardigan over a simple cotton dress, and looked around with solemn curiosity, the gold lion pendant resting at her chest like a witness. Some of the board members had the decency to look ashamed. Others looked annoyed that shame had entered so visibly. Mosi stepped forward at once. "You do not have to stay." Amara's eyes met his. "No, but they do have to hear me." That answer changed him. Not because it softened anything, because it confirmed that courage had walked into the room despite every reason not to. He nodded and gestured toward 2 chairs placed not at the far end, not against the wall, but beside the main table, deliberately equal, deliberately visible. When Amara sat, Imani climbed into the chair next to her and folded her hands with great seriousness, as if understanding that adults were about to say dangerous things and she must be still for them. Mosi waited until the door shut. Then he began. "Last night during the Adebayo Foundation Gala, this child identified me publicly as her grandfather and named my deceased son, Cabello Adebayo, as her father." He let the words settle. "DNA testing completed at 1:08 a.m. confirms with greater than 99.9% probability that she is my biological granddaughter." The room stirred, though most had already guessed. Baraka only adjusted his cuff. Mosi continued. That alone would be enough to expose moral failure inside this family. But what follows is worse. He nodded to Tendai. The legal officer activated the screen. The first image, the DNA report. The second, the cancelled maintenance invoice tied to Salima Adebayo's household office. The third, payment records routed through discretionary funds linked to Nala and to Baraka's consulting channels in the weeks before and after Kabelo's death. A board member swore under his breath. Baraka leaned back, voice cool. You are displaying incomplete financial context as if it were criminal proof. Tendai did not look at him. We are displaying a pattern. Mosi stepped in. A pattern of surveillance intimidation, witness pressure, false narratives and strategic concealment aimed at separating my son from the woman he intended to marry. Zuri turned sharply toward Amara. Intended to marry? According to whom? Amara answered before Mosi could. According to the man who asked me. No raised voice, no dramatics, just a sentence placed cleanly on the table like a blade. Zuri's mouth tightened. Tendai changed the screen. Now came testimony summaries, the break-in at Amara's room, the threats that blocked access to Mosi's home. The call made to the family gate, the note from Kabelo, the midnight warning before his death, the recent anonymous threat to Mosi's private phone. Then the final slide transcript excerpt from Nala's statement that morning, recorded in the office with counsel absent but witnesses present. Not a full confession to murder, something more corrosive. Admissions of surveillance, of containment, of Baraka's involvement, of a staged tampering scare meant to manipulate Kabelo psychologically. The younger woman on the board sat back in open horror. One of the older men said, "My God!" Baraka's counsel immediately stood. We object to any characterization of preliminary conversation as formal admission. Mosi turned to Baraka directly. Then correct it. Here, in front of everyone. Baraka did not immediately answer. For the first time, the room saw what power looked like when it realized the old scripts were failing. Nala spoke instead. You all want a villain simple enough to hate, she said, voice controlled but thinning. Life is uglier than that. Kabelo was reckless, emotional. He provoked our mother at every turn. He was planning public humiliation, legal conflict, inheritance disruption. Amara's chair scraped lightly as she stood. Every eye turned toward her. No, she said. Her voice was quiet. That made the room lean in harder. No, she repeated. Do not rewrite him now that he cannot speak. Nala gave a sharp laugh. And you will. Amara faced her fully. I do not need to rewrite him. I only need to tell the truth you worked so hard to bury. She rested one hand lightly on the back of Imani's chair and continued. Kabelo was not reckless because he loved me. He was brave because he refused to lie about loving me. He was not planning to humiliate this family. He was planning to stop letting this family define morality by convenience. He wanted his child born into truth, not strategy. The boardroom had gone utterly silent. Amara's eyes moved slowly across the table, not performing grief but carrying it where everyone could no longer avoid it. I was followed while pregnant. I was called a liar before I had asked for anything. My room was searched. My work disappeared. My child grew up asking why the truth felt like a secret nobody wanted. Her gaze found Baraka, then Nala. And all of you did what powerful people always do when they fear a poor woman may be telling the truth. You called her dangerous before she could be heard. Imani looked up at her mother, eyes wide, but unafraid. Amara's voice dropped lower. Do you know what I taught my daughter when she asked about her father? Not hatred, not revenge. I told her he was a good man trapped among people who thought goodness was weakness. I told her truth travels slowly when wealth pays for shortcuts. I told her that one day, if God was kind, the truth would find its own door. Mosi felt something in the room break then, not theatrically, morally. Because there are moments when a room full of educated, powerful people can no longer pretend ignorance is neutral. This was one of them. Baraka recovered first. Beautiful, he said coldly. Emotionally effective. Legally irrelevant. Mosi turned on him with a force that startled even himself. Legally irrelevant. His palm struck the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. A woman was hounded across this city while carrying my son's child. My son died under a manufactured threat orchestrated by people tied to my family office. Records were shaped. Access was blocked. Lies were fed to police and press. And you dare stand in this room and say, legally irrelevant. Baraka's composure fractured. It was never meant to kill him. The words escaped before counsel could stop him. Silence. Total. Fatal. Tendai did not move. The board members stared. Nala closed her eyes. Zuri looked suddenly horribly interested. Mosi's voice went almost soft. Thank you. Baraka realized it then. Too late. He had not denied. He had contextualized. Which was worse. Mosi straightened and looked at the compliance officer. Prepare immediate internal suspension orders for all individuals named in related records. Freeze access to estate-linked discretionary funds and legacy council accounts. Notify outside investigators. And contact criminal counsel. We are past private resolution. Then he looked at Nala, at the sister who had shared his childhood, his losses, his mother's approval and punishments, and still chosen preservation over conscience. I loved you, he said. Nala's face shifted not into apology, but into the shattered knowledge that love was no longer a shield. Mosi turned to Amara and Imani, not as spectacle, not as symbols, as the two people the room had most wronged. This company, he said, loud enough for everyone, and this family will no longer decide truth by status. Whatever justice costs it will be paid. And for the first time since she had entered the building, Amara's posture changed not into trust, not yet, but into the first fragile release of someone who realizes the burden of proof is no longer hers alone. The first arrest did not happen in public. It happened quietly, almost politely, in the underground parking level beneath Adebayo Holdings just after 3 in the afternoon. Baraka Sefu had insisted on leaving through the private exit flanked by counsel and still speaking in the smug, measured cadence of a man who believed process would save him. He had barely reached the rear door of the black sedan waiting for him when 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit stepped into his path and asked him to put down his phone. No shouting, no dramatic struggle, only the sudden collapse of a life built on controlled exits. Up on the 32nd floor, Mosi did not watch the arrest live. He heard about it from Tendai, who entered the office with a face so pale and taut that the update seemed almost unnecessary before he spoke. They took him, Tendai said. Mosi, standing by the window, gave one small nod. And Nala, he asked. She has been formally restricted from all family office accounts. Her lawyer is demanding she be allowed to leave the building. The investigators want a statement before that happens. Mosi looked down at the city below. The traffic had thickened into late afternoon rush. Johannesburg glimmered under the hard light, each glass building reflecting the next, as if the whole city were made of mirrors too bright to stare into directly. Somewhere out there, reporters were still chasing fragments. Somewhere else, men who had once toasted his family's influence were quietly distancing themselves from the damage. None of it mattered as much as the image he could not shake Imani in the ballroom, dusty sandals on polished marble, saying with complete certainty, Daddy Cabello said you would know me. He turned back, and Zuri Tendai hesitated. She has been calling communications, not publicly, quietly, trying to assess whether the engagement announcement scheduled for next month can be reframed. Mosi almost laughed, but no humor came. Reframed, he repeated. Yes, sir. Everything in his life had been framed for years. Success framed as virtue, silence framed as discretion, family cruelty framed as protection. Even grief had been framed into something elegant enough for newspapers and funeral programs. "No more. Send her in," he said. Tendai gave a small, grim nod and left. Zuri entered 3 minutes later in the same cream suit, though now it carried the fatigue of a day lived under collapsing expectations. She did not sit until Mosi gestured. Even then she remained poised on the edge of the chair, as if prepared to pivot the conversation back into mutual strategy. "Mosi," she began, voice low before anyone else distorts this. "Further, we need alignment." He sat behind the desk and looked at her quietly. "On what?" "On what is salvageable." There it was. Not grief, not moral horror. Salvage. She leaned forward slightly. "You are in shock. I understand that. But if you continue acting from outrage alone, the company will bleed for years. Investors are already nervous. Donors are calling. Opposition media will turn this into a dynasty story. The engagement can still help stabilize public confidence if we handle it correctly." Mosi stared at her. Not because he was surprised anymore. Because he realized with a strange kind of calm that he had been loved by her only in the way one loves a fortress warmly, admiringly, so long as the walls remain strong. "The engagement," he said slowly, "is what you bring to me today." Her expression tightened. "Do not make me sound monstrous for understanding consequences. You sound exactly like yourself." The sentence struck harder than if he had shouted. Zuri straightened. "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" "It means the mother of my dead son's child spent 6 years being hunted through this city while people around me called it containment. It means my son died inside a lie designed by my own family. It means a little girl who should have known safety learned to fear men in black suits. And you are here asking how our wedding can calm donors." Zuri's chin lifted, pride flaring now that strategy was failing. "I am here because someone has to think beyond emotional spectacle." Mosi stood. "So was my mother," he said. "That was the disease." For 1 second, Zuri's face emptied. He had never spoken to her like that. He had never looked at her as though the elegance itself might be rot. When she rose, it was slower. "Be careful, Mosi," she said. "You are romanticizing this woman because tragedy makes men vain about redemption." He stepped around the desk, closing the distance just enough for the truth to land cleanly. "No," he said. "I am seeing you clearly because tragedy stripped away your performance." She froze. Then the composure returned colder than before. "So that is it?" "Yes," the word echoed softly through the office. "You are ending this. Today I am ending what was never love enough to survive honesty." For the first time, pain crossed her face unguarded. Real pain. Not because she had lost moral ground, because she had lost position-future narrative. And perhaps beneath all that, because some part of her had believed she could still remain indispensable. She laughed once, but it trembled. "You think the woman downstairs is going to forgive you, because you throw me away." Mosi did not answer immediately, because the truth was harder and cleaner than that. "No," he said at last. "And if she never does, I will still have chosen the right thing too late, rather than the wrong thing forever." Zuri's eyes shone with anger. "You'll regret this. I already do." She held his gaze for a long moment, then picked up her handbag. At the door she paused, not turning back fully. "When the press comes for blood," she said, "do not pretend I was the cruelest person in your life." Mosi looked at her steadily. "I won't. That would dishonor the competition." She flinched as if slapped, then left. When the door shut behind her, the office became very quiet. Not peaceful, only empty in one specific way an illusion had gone. By early evening, investigators had taken formal statements from Nala Baraka, 2 former household staff members, and the retired office administrator Lindiwe Murray. Under pressure and presented with account trails, she could no longer dismiss. Lindiwe admitted that Salima's office had authorized reputation-sensitive actions related to Cabello's relationship. She insisted she never knew the full intent. Mosi almost believed that. The machinery of wrongdoing often relied on people who specialized in not knowing too much, but it was enough. Enough for warrants. Enough for public record. Enough for the police to reopen the circumstances surrounding Cabello's death under a broader theory of conspiracy, coercion, obstruction, and witness intimidation. By 7, the first leak hit the media. Not all the details. Just enough. Adebayo Ayre's death re-examined after family-linked records surface. Anonymous sources close to the investigation cite hidden child and internal financial trail. When Tendai brought the headlines in, Mosi only skimmed them. "Do we respond tonight?" Tendai asked. "Yes," Mosi said, "but not with lawyer's language." He took out his phone, then stopped. "No. Arrange the press room for tomorrow morning. Short statement, no questions until after. And before that." He paused. "I want to see Amara." Tendai did not ask why. He simply nodded. The apartment provided by the women's legal cooperative was on a quiet, tree-lined street far from the company district. By the time Mosi arrived, the sky had turned indigo. Security stayed outside. One female investigator opened the door, confirmed his identity, then let him in with the respectful wariness of someone who knew that powerful men could bring both rescue and harm. The apartment was modest. Warm light, clean surfaces, a bookshelf with legal manuals and old novels, a kettle on the stove, children's crayons on the low table already scattered in a small arc of color. Imani was asleep in the bedroom. Amara stood in the kitchenette wearing a plain sweater and no trace of makeup, both hands wrapped around a mug she was not drinking from. The domestic simplicity of the scene undid him more than any courtroom confrontation had. "You should have called first," she said. "I know. That is not the same as asking." "No," he said. "It isn't." She studied him. Some of the fury she carried had cooled into something more difficult. Caution shaped by fatigue. She had spent the day being heard, vindicated, exposed, and dragged through old wounds all at once. Mosi saw it in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I am sorry," he said. Her mouth twitched once, not with humor. For which century he accepted that too. "For all the versions I can name," he said, "and for the ones I still cannot see clearly enough." Amara looked down at her cup. "I do not need polished remorse, Mosi. I know." "Do you?" He forced himself not to defend, not to explain, not to ask for mercy dressed as understanding. "Perhaps not fully," he said. "But I know this: if I offer you money, houses, schools, anything before I offer you truth and presence, then I am repeating the same insult with softer hands." That made her eyes lift. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. In the bedroom, Imani turned once in sleep. Amara set the mug down. "That child," she said quietly, "does not need a grandfather who appears like a storm and disappears when shame fades. I won't. You cannot promise that from guilt. I am not promising from guilt." Then from what? Mosi thought of Cabello, of the note, of the ballroom, of the lost years, of his own fatherhood, where he had been strong in provision and weak in moral listening until weakness had become catastrophe. "From debt," he said, "and love if I am allowed to grow into it honestly." Something in her face shifted then. Not forgiveness, never that easily, but the answer had not disgusted her. She turned away, wiping at one eye quickly, as if irritated by her own body. "Imani likes pancakes," she said after a long moment, "and she hates being treated like a baby when she is afraid." The sentence was so ordinary that Mosi almost did not understand it. Then he did. It was not absolution. It was instruction. A beginning so small it could have been missed by anyone impatient for reconciliation. He nodded once. I can remember that. Amara folded her arms. We will see. Yes, he said. We will. He left a few minutes later without asking to see the sleeping child. That too was restraint he owed them. Back in the car, Johannesburg sliding past in streaks of light and shadow, Mosi realized justice had begun, but healing had not. Arrests could come, headlines could burn, Nala could lose everything she thought power guaranteed. Baraka could sit in a cell and call it misunderstanding. None of that would automatically teach a little girl what safety felt like. None of it would restore a dead son. None of it would make Amara's body forget years of fear. Justice could punish. Healing would require presence. And for the first time in his life, Mosi understood that being a grandfather was not a title the DNA report had given him. It was a role he had not yet earned. 3 months later, the city no longer said Mosi Adebayo's name the same way. Before it had been spoken, with the polished certainty reserved for men who seemed too powerful to be touched by ordinary consequence. Newspapers had once paired his image with words like visionary, untouchable dynasty kingmaker. Now the language had changed. It had become more complicated, less flattering, more human. Some headlines still circled scandal. Others spoke of reform. Others more reluctantly admitted that the man at the center of one of the year's ugliest family revelations had begun dismantling the very structures that once protected him. The legal cases moved slowly, as serious cases often did. Baraka remained under investigation. Then formal charge his old network fraying as records surfaced, and former associates chose self-preservation over loyalty. Nala had not gone to prison yet, but she had lost nearly everything she once believed permanent control over family offices. Access to discretionary accounts, influence on the board, the quiet deference of people who mistook proximity to power for virtue. The reopened inquiry into the circumstances surrounding Cabelo's death had reclassified the narrative permanently. No longer a tragic, private accident. Now it was publicly understood as a fatal outcome shaped by intimidation, deception, and deliberate interference. Justice had not arrived all at once, but it had arrived enough to change the air. And in that changed air, Mosi did something his younger self would once have considered weakness. He began showing up, not at boardrooms, not at donor galas. At a primary school in Rosebank on a Tuesday afternoon, with a paper bag of still warm pancakes from a place Tendai's assistant had researched and then been sternly told not to improve with silver packaging. At first he waited in the car across the street for 10 full minutes, watching children spill through the gate in uniforms and laughter and small rivalries that already seemed like the beginning of all adult politics. He had negotiated energy deals with ministers and stared down acquisition wars worth millions without flinching. Yet sitting with a paper bag on his lap while waiting for a 6-year-old girl to exit school made his hands more nervous than any board vote ever had. When Imani finally appeared, she was holding a sheet of paper and walking beside her teacher with the solemn dignity she seemed to believe proper children should carry. Then she saw him through the gate. She stopped. Not dramatically, just completely. Her teacher looked from her to the black SUV, then back at Mosi standing beside it in a plain navy shirt without a driver opening the door for him. The teacher clearly recognized him, but had the grace not to perform surprise. Imani took a few cautious steps forward. "Did someone tell you pancakes are my favorite?" she asked immediately, narrowing her eyes at the bag. Or did you guess Mosi crouched to meet her gaze? "I was informed by a very strict source." Imani nodded gravely. "That makes sense. Mama knows everything." He almost smiled. "I am beginning to suspect that." She looked at him for another second, then held up the paper in her hand. "I got a star in reading." Mosi took the paper as carefully as if it were a legal document that could alter nations. At the top, in large, uneven letters, was a sentence about a lion and a river. Beneath it sat a bright gold star sticker, for reasons he could not have explained even to himself. His throat tightened. "This is excellent," he said. Imani accepted the praise as her due. "I know. Then, after a beat, you can come on Fridays too if you do not wear a suit that scares the other children." He laughed before he could stop himself. Across the street, life continued. Cars passed. A gardener trimmed hedges outside a neighboring property. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice. The ordinary world so long ignored in his life, except as labor supporting larger ambitions, had started to feel holy in its repetition. He did come on Fridays too. Not every Friday. Amara would not allow dependency to grow faster than trust. That boundary remained clear, and Mosi respected it, because respect had become the first language he needed to learn if he wished to belong in their lives without poisoning them further. He also learned other things: that Imani hated kiwi fruit with righteous intensity, that she loved stories but interrupted them constantly to question logic, that she did not like loud voices in closed rooms, that when she was frightened she became more polite, not less a detail that broke something inside him the first time he noticed it, because it revealed how carefully she had learned to survive adult moods, that Amara never accepted help she had not examined from every angle first, that she paid attention not to what he promised, but to whether he arrived when he said he would, whether he listened fully before responding, whether he remembered small things without turning them into performances of generosity. So he remembered. The pancakes, the reading star, the extra sweater in the car, because Imani always forgot the weather turned sharp after sunset. The fact that Amara preferred receipts-written schedules and clear boundaries over spontaneous gestures from powerful men who believed affection excused unpredictability. One Saturday morning he went with them to the cemetery. The day was bright, the wind carrying dry winter light across rows of stone and trimmed grass. Cabelo's grave stood beneath a jacaranda tree that had long ago shed its blossoms. For years the inscription had been clean, elegant, respectable. Beloved son. Vision lost too soon. It said nothing true enough to hurt. Mosi had changed that. Now the stone included Amara's chosen line. Beneath the dates he chose truth even when it cost him home. When Amara first read it weeks earlier, she had said nothing for a long time. Then only, that is closer. Today all three of them stood before the grave in silence. Imani held a small bunch of wildflowers she had insisted were better than the expensive arrangements, because Daddy was not a boring rich person. Mosi had not argued. The child's theology of sincerity was already wiser than most board charters. After placing the flowers down, Imani looked up at the headstone and whispered, "We came together." Then she stepped back. The wind moved lightly through the grass. Amara stood with her hands folded, face composed but tender in that guarded way Mosi had come to recognize as the shape of her deepest feeling. He did not reach for her. He had learned not to claim closeness by instinct. Instead, he simply stood beside her. "I should have known him better when he was alive," he said quietly. Amara did not answer immediately. "You cannot make that sentence small enough to survive it," she said at last. "So stop trying." He nodded. A moment later she added, "But you can decide what kind of man speaks to him now." That stayed with him. It followed him into the months that came after. He restructured the foundation in Cablo's name and created a legal support fund for single mothers facing intimidation, housing coercion, and workplace retaliation. He did not attach his own portrait to it. No giant launch, no gala, no manipulative redemption campaign. Just funding lawyers, safe apartments, and transparent oversight by people his old world would once have dismissed as inconvenient. He dissolved the old household office entirely. He sold the luxury suite hotel account his mother had once used for private problem management. He ordered a full independent review of security practices across every branch of his company, banning off-book surveillance and private family discretionary channels that had operated for years under the language of protection. The board resisted. then adapted. Power mourned its lost habits briefly and then learned the new price of serving under him. Yet none of that mattered as much as a rainy evening in Amara's kitchen 3 weeks later. The power had gone out in the neighborhood, which would once have sent Mosey instinctively toward generators, backup systems, assistants, and solution teams. Instead, he sat at a small table under lantern light, while Imani drew crooked lions on scrap paper, and Amara cooked lentils on a gas burner by the window. The rain tapped softly on the roof. The room smelled of onions, spice, and warm bread. There was no staff, no agenda, no photographers. Only 3 people and the difficult ordinary work of learning whether grief could be lived with instead of merely narrated. Imani looked up from her drawing. Grandpa. The word entered the room gently. Not like the first time, not as explosion, not as revelation thrown like a stone through glass, as belonging. Mosey turned his head slowly. Imani frowned at her page. Is this lion too fat? Amara froze by the stove. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then Mosey answered very softly, because anything louder might have broken him. No, he said. He looks well loved. Imani seemed satisfied and returned to her drawing. Amara set down the spoon she was holding. When she finally looked at Mosey, her eyes were full, not with surrender, not with fairy tale forgiveness, but with something truer and harder won. Permission. A small one. Human, not mythic. Enough. Later that night, when Imani had fallen asleep on the couch under a knitted blanket, and the rain had softened to a whisper, Mosey stood near the doorway preparing to leave. Amara walked him there. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, "She chose that word for herself this time." He nodded, unable to trust his voice. "She does not give trust cheaply," Amara added. "Neither should she." A faint, tired smile touched her mouth. "Good, you are learning." He looked at her, the woman his family had called dangerous, when what they really meant was truthful, the woman who had carried injustice without letting it rot her daughter's heart, the woman who had every reason to turn him into a permanent villain, and had instead demanded something harder accountability without performance. "I am still sorry," he said. "I know," she replied. "Not absolution, but no longer rejection." He stepped out into the cooling night and paused beneath the small overhang as the wet street reflected gold from the lantern light behind him. For years he had believed legacy lived in buildings, market strength, family names engraved above entrances. Cabelo's death, Imani's arrival, and Amara's truth had destroyed that illusion completely. Legacy was not what survived your control. It was what survived your confession. And as Mosey walked to the car without bodyguards crowding close, carrying no briefcase, no prepared speech, only the quiet ache of a life remade too late, and yet still not too late to matter. He understood the final mercy hidden inside all the life. The truth had not come to destroy him. It had come to stop him from remaining the man who deserved destruction. Sometimes the most dangerous lies are not the ones shouted in public. They are the ones whispered inside families, polished by status, and protected by people who call cruelty duty. This story is a reminder that truth may be delayed, buried, mocked, and hunted, but it does not die just because powerful people are uncomfortable with it. Mostly lost years, never recovered. Amara carried pain she never should have borne. Imani grew through fear no child should have known. And Cabello paid the heaviest price of all for choosing honesty in a family that had mistaken control for love. Yet even after all that damage, healing still became possible. The moment excuses ended and responsibility began. That is the hard lesson. Justice is not the same as healing. But healing cannot begin without justice. Apologies without change are only declaration. Regret without presence is only self-pity. Real love does Love tells the truth, protects the vulnerable, and stays long enough to rebuild what silence destroyed. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe family betrayal hurts more than betrayal from strangers? And where are you watching from today? If you want more emotional, powerful stories about hidden truths, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with this channel.